The loudest voice isn't always the one leading off phone. It's the calm, focused presence that commands the room without demanding attention. It's the one who speaks little but moves with clear, unwavering intent, who ends up in control. In a world addicted to constant chatter, there's immense strength in the person who chooses silence not out of fear or avoidance, but as a weapon sharpened by awareness and restraint. They're not hiding, they're preparing, observing, calculating, holding their power until it actually matters. That's not weakness, that's real, uncommon strength. We live in a time where we're trained to overshare, to prove our worth through noise, to constantly explain and justify ourselves. But in doing so, we often dull our edge, scatter our focus, and miss the larger picture. The Stoics understood this. They trained themselves to remain composed, to act with clarity and purpose, not for appearances, but to prevail where others fell apart. That's what today is about, the strategy of silence. Not silence as escape, but as presence, as power, the kind of power that thrives in a world obsessed with attention. If that resonates, keep reading, because this isn't about hype, it's about transformation. You've probably noticed that the most commanding figure in the room is rarely the loudest. It's the one who listens carefully, measures their words, and waits until their moment to speak, and when they do, everyone pays attention. That's not charisma, it's not mystery, it's mastery. Mastery over emotion, over impulse, over energy. In a culture where people rush to be heard, the one who waits becomes magnetic, not by demanding respect, but by earning it. Their silence speaks of self-command, and that is rare. It tells the world they don't need to dominate others, they've already mastered themselves. Socrates said, "The beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms." But how can you define anything, especially yourself, if your thoughts keep spilling out before they're fully formed? The person who speaks less isn't hiding, they're sharpening. Many mistake noise for value, thinking constant talk makes them seem smarter or more powerful. But noise often fills the space where intention should live. Real power lies not in how much you say, but in what you choose not to. When you stop reacting out of ego, stop explaining out of fear, stop justifying to gain approval, you conserve your energy, and in that silence, you create space not just around you, but inside you. That space becomes a forge where your clarity grows, your presence deepens, and your actions begin to carry undeniable weight. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart." Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. Silence is the door to that awakening. It strips away the performative self, the one chasing validation, and lets the real you surface. We lose so much strength by speaking unnecessarily, just to be seen, just to feel important. Every time you do that, you spend energy that could have gone into action. Worse, you risk exposing your plans before they've matured, drawing attention before the idea has solidified. Then, when it's time to act, the spark is gone. Plato said, "Wise men speak because they have something to say, fools because they have to say something." When you operate from inner confidence, you don't narrate every step, you let your results speak. You allow your quiet, focused progress to build a reputation louder than any words. There's a deep kind of empowerment in moving silently. You stop chasing applause and start chasing depth. You hold your ideas until they're ready. You wait for instinct to verify what your ego rushed to announce. And when you act, it's not for attention, it's just who you are now. No big moment, no big speech, just clean, deliberate execution. And the best part, when others finally notice, you don't need to say "I told you so." You've already moved on to the next win. That's how silence builds momentum, independent of anyone's opinion. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." But knowing yourself doesn't come in noise, it comes in stillness, in reflection, in quiet confidence. When you start performing, you start listening. And in that listening, you begin learning about others, about the world, and most importantly, about yourself. That's when you stop reacting and start choosing wisely. You stop saying, "Here's what I'll do," and instead ask, "What needs to be done?" Then you do it fully, quietly, without wasted words. Because talking about your goals gives you a premature dopamine hit, tricking your brain into thinking you've already succeeded. You get the praise before doing the work, and that makes you lose your hunger, that fire, that edge. It fades not because you lack ability, but because you already tasted the reward. It's a trap, loud plans, great intentions, but not much to show. So instead of announcing your next move, build it silently. Let your actions speak before your words ever do. And when you speak, make it count. Say something real, necessary, powerful. Otherwise, stay focused, stay quiet. That's not silence as weakness, that's silence as strategy. That's your edge. Think of a master chess player. They don't rush, don't show off, don't react emotionally. They study, they wait. And with one quiet, precise move, they change the entire game. Not because they moved first, but because they moved right. That's the power silence gives you, the space to see clearly, act decisively, and build something real. Space to move wisely. This kind of discipline is anything but passive. In fact, it's one of the most active and intentional mindsets you can carry. It takes real strength to hold your ideas close, to work without announcing every step, to build quietly while the world applauds someone else. Silence isn't about sitting back. It's about being deeply engaged with an energy that's focused, not wasted. It's like aiming with purpose before pulling the trigger, instead of firing wildly and hoping something lands. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." And there's truth in that, because if your energy is constantly directed outward, toward opinions, praise, or visibility, you'll never create anything meaningful. Silence is that turn inward. It's the shift from reaction to creation, from proving to building. When you no longer feel the need to announce every thought or declare every move, you reclaim your power. Your focus sharpens. Your decisions become more intentional. You act with purpose instead of reacting on impulse. And when the results come, they're undeniable, not because you hyped them, but because you earned them. Plato once said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power." And real power begins with self-control, not just over your actions, but over your words, your presence, and how much of yourself you expose before the time is right. Every word you speak gives others a glimpse of your inner world, so why not wait until it's something truly worth sharing? This isn't about secrecy or fear, it's about conserving energy, protecting your direction, and keeping your goals clean. The quiet builder will always outlast the noisy dreamer. One gathers likes, the other gathers leverage. One talks, the other stacks bricks. Silence keeps your vision clear, your intention focused, your mind uncluttered. You protect the seed while it's growing, and when it blooms, it doesn't need a speech, its presence speaks volumes. That's the true power of silence. The ability to move without noise, to aim without warning, to build without applause, and to win without needing recognition. Real power doesn't demand attention, it arrives and shifts everything. The greatest leaders, athletes, creators, they weren't born in the spotlight. They were forged in silence, in those invisible hours behind the scenes, while the world watched someone else. They practiced, refined, prepared, not waiting for permission, but for the right moment. And when it came, they didn't hesitate. They didn't panic. They were already ready. But here's what most miss. The loudest noise doesn't come from outside, it's inside. It's the inner critic whispering doubt, the overthinker creating delay, the fear disguised as logic. That inner noise has derailed more dreams than any obstacle ever could. Carl Jung also said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's the risk of inner noise. Pretends to be wisdom, but it's often fear in disguise. The disciplined, focused version of you doesn't need commentary, doesn't need validation, it just moves. Silence isn't only about what you don't say out loud, it's about mastering the noise inside your head. It's choosing not to spiral every time a what if appears. Because when your mind is crowded, your vision blurs. You miss signs, you miss your moment. You spend so much time managing imaginary problems that you fail to recognize the real solutions sitting right in front of you. But once you silence that chaos, a deeper clarity surfaces. You start to hear your intuition again, the voice that knows what to do and when. You catch subtle patterns others miss. You see connections invisible to the noisy mind. Plato said, the first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself, and silence is the path to that victory. It's how you gain self-awareness, how you hear the real you, not the version shaped by pressure, but the version that's calm, clear, and composed. Discipline isn't just about external actions, it's also about internal alignment. It's knowing when your mind is helping and when it's holding you back. The ability to sit in silence without reaching for a screen, a distraction, or a fix, that's real mental toughness. That silence is where growth begins, where strategy gets refined, where clarity reveals itself. Socrates said, and unexamined, life is not worth living, but you can't examine anything if you're constantly talking over yourself. You need silence, real, intentional stillness to actually see, because insight doesn't shout, wisdom doesn't yell. The most life-changing realizations don't come in fireworks, they arrive as whispers, And if your mind is too loud, you'll miss them. So ask yourself, when was the last time you sat with yourself in complete silence? No noise, no distractions, just you, your thoughts, and the truth that shows up when you stop running. It's not easy. Most avoid silence because it brings their insecurities to the surface. But that discomfort, that's your edge. If you can, face it, you build a strength no outside noise can touch. It's not about being cold, it's about being composed. Being unmoved doesn't mean you're numb, it means your feelings don't own you. That space between stimulus and response, that's where your power lives. That's where your power lives, in the space between reaction and response. Reaction is impulsive, driven by ego or fear. Response is intentional, rooted in clarity. And in that space, real influence begins, not from force, but from calm control. True leadership isn't about who talks the most, who commands attention through noise, or who always gets the last word. It's about presence. It's the energy you bring before you even speak, the clarity and groundedness that others feel when you enter the room. The silent leader doesn't demand respect. They earn it without shouting, without showing off, simply by thinking before speaking, observing before acting. That kind of influence isn't a performance, it's built in quiet hours, in restraint, in patience, in knowing the room before trying to lead it. Aristotle said, "He who cannot be a good follower cannot be a good leader," and that begins with listening, not listening to reply, but to understand, to see the nuances others miss because they're too busy trying to be noticed. This is where silence becomes more than just a habit, it becomes a strategy. Whether you're walking into a negotiation or facing a crossroads in life, the one who listens longer, who waits for the right moment, who speaks only when it matters, wins. They don't flood the room with words, they drop a few with weight. That's precision, that's presence. And it's not limited to boardrooms or meetings. It applies to your goals, your vision, your everyday momentum. How much time is wasted on things that look like progress but lead nowhere? The scrolling, the comparing, the endless busy work, it's movement, not momentum. Not all action is aligned. Not all energy is effective. Plato said, "The excessive increase of anything often causes a reaction in the opposite direction." Too much scattered energy leads to burnout, confusion, and regret. That's why silence matters. It teaches subtraction. It forces you to ask what actually matters and to cut the rest. The silent strategist doesn't say yes to everything. They go deep, not wide. They create real results, not by being everywhere, but by being in the right place with full presence. Because winning in life isn't about speed, it's about direction. And direction only comes when you pause, reflect, and decide what truly moves you forward. Not what's trendy, not what others chase, but what aligns with your values. Silence helps you stay in your lane and stay sharp. It teaches you to say no to distractions, to protect your time, energy, and focus. Because every yes to something meaningless is a no to something that could have changed your life. Focus is rare, not because people don't want it, but because they're too distracted to realize what they're giving up. In a culture obsessed with more, Silence leads you to less but better. It reveals where you're leaking energy and why. Even when doubt creeps in, when clarity feels distant, silence isn't empty, it's a mirror. It shows you what's real and what's noise. It strips away the applause, the opinions, the validation, and leaves you with the truth. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But silence won't let you run. It anchors you until you face what's true." That's not weakness, it's where strength begins. Because clarity doesn't come from adding more, it comes from cutting away the excess, from quieting the world long enough to hear your own voice. And silence isn't just for stillness, it lives in movement too. The best action often grows from the calmest place. That's where strategy lives. That's where timing sharpens. That's where your moves become deliberate instead of reactive. Plato said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power." And one of the most powerful things you can do is pause, act with purpose, not panic. You don't build a meaningful life by chasing every shiny thing. You build it by knowing what matters and locking in. That's what silence gives you. It slows down the chaos just enough for you to get honest. And from that honesty comes alignment. From alignment comes decisions that matter, actions that reflect who you've chosen to become, not who the world pressures you to be. Greatness isn't about intensity alone, it's not about how loud or how fast. It's about clarity, and clarity only shows up when you stop trying to outrun the noise and start listening beneath it. So even when you're moving, building, creating, carry silence with you, not as absence, but as depth, as awareness, as that calm internal compass that says, you don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need to be seen to make progress. You just need to be clear. Clear on what matters, clear on who you are, and clear on where you're going. Some people move just for the sake of moving. They rush into action not because it's the right time, but because stillness feels uncomfortable. They confuse movement with progress, noise with meaning. But there's a different kind of strength, the kind that grows through strategic patience, waiting not out of fear but from wisdom, sitting still not because you're lost, but because you know the moment hasn't arrived yet. And when it does, you don't hesitate, you don't second guess, you strike. That's a higher discipline, not just knowing what to do, but knowing when to do it, and holding your ground until that moment arrives. Because when you act from stillness, your movement is pure. You don't need to explain it. You're not seeking approval. You're not asking for permission. You're just ready. And when it's time to move, you move all in, no safety nets, no soft landings, no applause required. That's the kind of action born from silence and forged through discipline. It doesn't just create noise, it creates legacy. It leaves an imprint. It lasts. Most people miss that level of impact because they're too busy performing for attention, wanting to be seen, heard, celebrated. But fame is loud and fleeting. It needs constant noise to stay alive, thrives on attention, and disappears when the spotlight shifts. Legacy, though, legacy is different. It's built in silence, while the world is distracted during early mornings, late nights, when no one's watching. Carl Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look." into your heart, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. And that awakening, the one that fuels real, meaningful work, it doesn't come under bright lights. It comes when you're alone with your thoughts, building without applause, showing up daily without recognition. That's where legacy begins. Aristotle believed we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Legacy is born from those unseen habits, from quiet consistency, from the invisible moments that build something unshakable, something real. And when you live that way, focused, patient, grounded, you stop worrying about being remembered and start living in a way that matters. You stop chasing claps and start making change. The kind that survives, trends, outlasts hype, and still speaks when you're gone. Because true power never needed a stage, it just needed a purpose. And the people who left the deepest marks on the world weren't the loudest, they were the most disciplined. They didn't announce their moves, they executed them. They didn't seek the spotlight, they earned respect. They prepared in silence and performed when it counted. So maybe it's time you flipped the script. What if you stopped explaining and started executing? What if your moves were private, your plans were protected, and your focus was sharp, not on sharing every goal, but on achieving them? What if your strength wasn't in reaction, but in observation, not watching out of fear, but with calm, sharp awareness, collecting data, learning patterns, sharpening timing? Because often, the best move isn't the loudest, it's the one made with wisdom, at the right moment, with clarity and intention. Plato said, "Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools, because they have to say something." There's freedom in realizing you don't have to say much. Not because you have nothing to say, but because your focus is deeper. It's on the work, on the vision, on building something that doesn't require constant validation to matter. And when you stop trying to prove, you start preparing, quietly, patiently, powerfully. You start playing the long game, the one that isn't driven by ego, but by clarity. And that clarity, it comes from silence. Not silence that hides, but silence that sharpens. Let your actions speak. Let your consistency be your voice. Let your results carry your message. You don't need a megaphone when your work carries weight. In fact, the louder you try to be, the less space you leave for your presence to be felt. But move with intention. People feel it, even when you say nothing. Carl Jung once said, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." Silence is often where that fire is faced, not in the noise of performance, but in the solitude of preparation. That's where real strength is born, where character gets refined. And once you've been through that fire once, you've stood still in the storm, you become unshakable. In a world of noise, be the signal, the one who speaks less but says more, the one who doesn't posture but still commands, the one who doesn't need the last word because their actions already ended the conversation. And never forget, the deepest waters make the least noise. The strongest people don't broadcast strength. The loudest voice might get attention. It rarely earns leadership. It's the quiet one, the still one, the prepared one who shapes the future. Because silence, when it's focused, intentional, And disciplined isn't just a personality trait, it's a strategy. One that wins without shouting. One that prepares in the dark and rises at the right moment. One that builds what lasts long, after the noise fades. That's the kind of power worth chasing. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real. The kind that works quietly and transforms everything it touches. In the end, it's not how loud you are, it's how deep your impact runs. Let your silence sharpen you. Let your actions speak. And when the time comes, let your results be undeniable. If this stirred something inside you, there's more waiting. Watch one of the videos on your screen, it might be exactly what you need next. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal. Your presence here means more than you know. Until next time, stay grounded, stay focused, and keep walking your quiet path. We'll be here when you return.